Our next speaker is a whistleblower also, and that's Kevin Ryan. And he's a longtime co-editor of the Journal of 9/11 Studies. And he's written a book some years ago called Another 19. And Kevin is an expert on 9/11 in many different areas. So I want to bring on Kevin Ryan and appreciate him being here. How you doing, Kevin?
Good, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the invitation to speak today on the 20th anniversary of the unsolved crimes of September 11th. Those crimes remain unsolved because they were never honestly investigated, apart from the work of independent researchers. The official accounts are largely false, and people who have taken the time to look deeper have found that there are good reasons to believe that people within the government and major corporations were involved in planning and executing the attacks. The 9/11 Commission told us that the 9/11 crimes were the result of a series of failures to connect the dots, stating that the most important failure was one of imagination. Of course, this ignored the fact that most of what happened that day could not have happened without the complicity of insiders. It also ignored the fact that leaders of the intelligence agencies that supposedly could not connect the dots are among the suspects in the crimes. In a way, though, it's true that 9/11 was a failure of imagination, and many people continue to be unable to imagine how any of it could have happened in any way other than what they were told by the government and the mainstream media. They simply cannot imagine anything could be wrong, despite the problems that the official account causes for the laws of science, among other things. It's hard for some people to consider that we could be intentionally attacked from within and that our leaders and the mainstream media would ignore most of the facts about it. This failure to imagine alternatives is why these types of power grab crimes have happened again and again throughout history. Examples of similar crimes include the Reichstag fire in Germany that gave rise to the Nazi regime, the JFK assassination that many now understand was an act of government insiders, the Gulf of Tonkin attack that never happened and led to the CIA war in Vietnam becoming a huge military effort, the Iran-Contra crimes, and the anthrax attacks that followed 9/11. We could say that it's been repeated failures of imagination that allow these kinds of crimes to be committed again and again. Today, crimes like this are helped along by highly consolidated mainstream media that functions as the most effective propaganda machine ever seen. I personally failed to imagine that 9/11 was a deception for almost 2 years. But in 2003, I began to understand that the people who govern us would do anything to grow their power and maintain control. I began by questioning the company I worked for, Underwriters Laboratories, which I knew had performed the fire resistance testing for the steel components used to build the World Trade Center. In 2003, I began asking questions of the CEO and the company's leadership in the fire resistance testing division. I won't go into detail about that here, but if anyone is interested, you can find more information at 911truth.org, the Corbett Report, and other sites. I'll just say that I was fired by UL for allowing my questions to become public, and that led to a personal journey of discovery related to 9/11 and similar crimes. Since being fired by UL, I've spent countless hours investigating 9/11. Every weekend, every holiday and vacation day, and most evenings were spent on this mission. My family understood and supported me. I'll tell you a bit about my 18 years investigating 9/11 so that you understand better what I will say afterward. After being fired by UL, I did a lot of research. I wrote many articles on a wide variety of subjects related to 9/11, and I collaborated with others to write books. I started giving presentations around the country and in Canada. For example, a 2006 presentation that I gave in Chicago called the NIST World Trade Center Report, a new standard for deception, was later used a couple of years later as the basis for a film called Blueprint for Truth by a new group called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I collaborated with scientists to start action groups and to create the Journal of 9/11 Studies, where there are over 150 peer-reviewed papers covering a wide range of 9/11 related subjects. I authored or co-authored peer-reviewed scientific papers in mainstream scientific journals, including all of those related to the finding of thermite in the dust from the World Trade Center. For example, the one that Fred Whitehurst just mentioned. I presented with 9/11 survivors and victims' family members, and I met with official investigation leaders, including Lee Hamilton, co-chair of the 9/11 Commission. With others, I pursued legal actions and requests for correction of official reports. I helped organize events and conferences, including the Toronto hearings on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, and I appeared on national radio and television programs and in many films. I met and worked with some great people over the years, including some who are no longer with us. But my point in reviewing this personal history is to demonstrate that some of us have worked very hard over the years to bring out the truth of 9/11. But after having thoroughly established the falsity of the official accounts and having done much to raise awareness, it was clear to me that a lack of focused investigation into suspects was where the 9/11 truth movement had failed. We couldn't spend another 10 or 20 years telling people that the official accounts were false or asking the US government to open a new investigation. We needed to give people something more to consider to take the next step. And to do that, we needed to take risks. So in 2013, I published my own book called Another 19, Investigating Legitimate 9/11 Suspects. That book focused on who could have committed the crimes of 9/11 in order to help people imagine who could have done it and take the next steps. What the official accounts did was immediately jump to conclusions. People who do that often have an agenda and can never present any evidence of their assertions, and that was the case for the government. But it's also the case for others who prefer to hold on to their preconceptions instead of looking objectively at the 9/11 crimes. For example, when people claim that foreknowledge is evidence of some country or ethnic group having committed the crimes, they overlook the fact that we were warned about the attacks before they happened by at least a dozen other countries. So if foreknowledge alone is enough, the governments of at least a dozen countries are all suspects, and that approach doesn't help. The US government wanted us to immediately blame people who happen to live on the most strategically important lands that the government had already planned to invade and occupy for the purpose of stealing natural resources. This led to blaming Muslims in general, since the countries in question were all largely of Muslim faith. Others wanted to blame other countries and let Americans off the hook entirely, forgetting that no one could ever attack the US so completely without insiders being involved. I wanted to do better with my investigation into who could have been responsible and examine the evidence before making hypotheses or drawing conclusions. That is, I wanted to focus. I wrote my book in two parts. You can call the first half the setup and the second half the takedown. The setup means that in the years before 9/11, there was a concerted effort to create a myth about a group called Al-Qaeda that led people to distrust the Muslims who happened to be living on those most strategic lands. That story was never well substantiated, and it led to questions about the involvement of those who originally funded and trained Al-Qaeda, the US military and the CIA. By the late 1990s, the mainstream media had gotten the picture, however, that they were supposed to promote this myth about Al-Qaeda and ignore any questions about it. What we should understand is that people who actually committed the crimes of September 11th didn't intend to just hijack planes and take down the buildings. They intended to blame others. To accomplish that plan, the real criminals needed to create a false account of what happened, and undoubtedly that need was considered well in advance. In this light, the propaganda leading up to 9/11 and the cover-up that followed provides a link between the blaming others parts of the crimes and the physical parts of the crimes. The setup involved creating a story about the alleged hijackers who would ultimately be accused of the crimes. What we know about Mohammed Atta and company is that they spent the years before 9/11 trying to draw attention to themselves. For example, using their own names and credit cards and doing stupid things like leaving an airliner stranded on a runway at Miami International Airport. If you believe the FBI, they left their plans and copies of the Quran for us to conveniently find. In other words, they wanted to be noticed. People sometimes wonder why it's important to investigate these alleged hijackers and the others officially accused of committing the 9/11 crimes. After all, they could not have accomplished most of what happened. And again, the answer is that the official accounts are important because they are part of the crimes. Identifying and examining the accused and the people who created the official 9/11 myth helps to reveal the ones who were responsible overall. To find out who actually committed the crimes, I began by focusing on, first, what happened that should not have happened, and secondly, what did not happen that should have happened. From there, I asked specific, well-formulated questions and sought answers that were evidence-based. This focused approach led me to ask questions like, who could have disabled the US national air defenses that should have responded effectively and intercepted some, if not all, of the hijacked airplanes? Who could have caused 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers to fall through the path of what should have been the most resistance? My initial list of suspects was around 50 people. After a while, I was able to narrow that list down and focus on 19 people comparable to the accused 19 hijackers that not only had the means, motive, and opportunity to accomplish the crimes, but who were all connected to 2 men who held the reins of power that day, Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. I won't have time to go into each of my suspects today, but I can give a few examples of why they are far more likely to have accomplished the crimes of 9/11 than the accused young Arab men. Beginning with a question about the setup, I asked, who could have prevented US intelligence agencies from tracking down and stopping the alleged hijackers before 9/11? The leaders of the FBI and the CIA were obvious choices, but also Richard Clarke stood out. Clarke was the US counterterrorism czar, the man most responsible for preventing terrorism in the US. He was appointed by President George H.W. Bush in 1992, and he still held that position on 9/11. Clarke was also a member of the highly secret Continuity of Government Planning Group, along with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. And he implemented that secret plan for the first time on 9/11. He was a personal representative of the government of the United Arab Emirates, a country that financed terrorism and that all the alleged hijackers had traveled through just before 9/11. Clarke had predicted terrorist attacks on Washington and New York, and by tipping off his friends in the UAE, was behind the failure of 2 CIA attempts to kill or capture Osama bin Laden. On 9/11, he led the secure White House video conference that failed to respond to the attacks. Another setup question was, who could have disabled the systems in place to prevent hijackings that should have been effective? On 9/11, former Special Operations Commander General Michael Canavan was in the civilian role of hijack coordinator at the FAA. He had just started the job, and he was mysteriously missing on the morning of 9/11. Canavan's role was the position that was most responsible for communications between the FAA and the military, and his absence was critical to the failure of air defenses. Having only started as FAA's hijack coordinator just months earlier, Canavan left the position a month after 9/11. But according to an FAA intelligence employee, Canavan started his job by running training exercises that were, quote, pretty damn close to the 9/11 plot. Another important question was, who could have disabled the US chain of command that should have immediately responded to the attacks but did not? Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was in charge of US defenses on 9/11. After the Pentagon was hit, Rumsfeld inexplicably wandered out to the parking lot for around 30 minutes instead of leading the defense of the country. His presence there showed that he was not concerned about the other planes that were reported as hijacked, as if he knew what to expect. Rumsfeld did not concern himself with the work of his direct subordinate, NORAD Commander Ralph Eberhart, and he did not do his job to ensure the nation's air defenses. Rumsfeld and his Defense Department later failed to cooperate with 9/11 investigations. Who could have disabled the U.S. national air defenses that should have responded effectively and intercepted some, if not all, of the hijacked aircraft? Ralph Eberhart, the commander of NORAD on 9/11, sponsored the highly coincidental military exercises, or war games, that obstructed the military response. 12 hours before the attacks, Eberhart apparently ordered the Defense Readiness Alert System, Infocon, to its least protective level, making it easier to hack or compromise the defense computer networks. Failing to do his duties to protect the nation while giving orders that prevented response, Eberhart later lied to Congress about the military's knowledge of the hijackings, stating in an October 2001 Senate hearing that NORAD had documented evidence of some of the hijackings that is in direct contradiction to the 9/11 Commission report. Now, most people know that lying to Congress is a crime, even if you're not under oath. For example, John Poindexter, President Reagan's national security advisor, was sentenced to prison for lying to Congress about key details of the Iran-Contra affair. And with 9/11, we have at least two examples of people lying to Congress who are among my suspects: Ralph Eberhart and former CIA Director George Tenet. So the legal question is, why have charges not been brought against these men for these crimes? Moving to the takedown. Who could have caused 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers to fall through the path of what should have been the most resistance? A man named Wirt Walker, whose family has a history of connections to the CIA and deep state events, led a mysterious company called Stratesec that provided the security services for the World Trade Center up to the day of 9/11. Because Stratesec controlled the electronic access to the buildings, the company could give access to whoever planted explosives in the buildings at whatever times and areas they needed. Stratesec also had provided security for United Airlines, which owned 2 of the planes hijacked on 9/11, and Dulles Airport, where American Flight 77 took off that day. Stratesec held its annual meetings in offices leased by Saudi Arabia, and Walker also ran an aviation company in Oklahoma at an airport that was associated with the alleged hijackers. Wirt Walker was named a 9/11 insider trading suspect in previously classified 9/11 Commission documents and by the SEC, but he was never investigated. So again, in terms of what legal actions could and should already have been taken, insider trading is a crime that can lead to charges against an individual and discovery of more evidence. Why has this not been pursued? Another person who should be investigated for the World Trade Center crimes is L. Paul Bremer. Bremer's career with the State Department and as managing director of Kissinger Associates led him to become one of the few people considered experts on terrorism before 9/11. On the day of 9/11, Bremer coincidentally had an office in the South Tower of the World Trade Center and was working for Marsh & McLennan, a company that occupied all the impact floors in the North Tower. He was also a director for a company that had patented a thermite demolition device and was one of the first people to provide the false official account for what happened on television that morning. What about the Pentagon, the subject that often causes so much controversy? Who could have coordinated an attack against the Pentagon that struck the exact spot that had just been renovated while allowing all Pentagon leadership to escape unharmed? Paul Wolfowitz was Deputy Secretary of Defense on 9/11. Along with a number of my other suspects, Wolfowitz was a leader of the organization PNAC that 1 year before 9/11 had called for a transformational event like a new Pearl Harbor to reinvigorate US military spending. In the 8 months leading up to 9/11, Wolfowitz led the Pentagon building project that renovated the exact spot where Flight 77 was reported to have impacted. The company that did the renovation work was then hired to clean up the evidence at both the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Again, that's quite a coincidence. The official reports and investigations, I feel, were also crimes in that they allowed the perpetrators to get away. Who could have ensured that no effective investigation was conducted and that no one was held accountable? My leading suspect in that regard is Porter Goss, who was a CIA operative that after 9/11 became director of the CIA. On the day of 9/11, Gauss was meeting with Pakistani Secret Service General Mahmoud Ahmed as the first plane struck the World Trade Center. He later helped cover up the crimes through his leadership of the Congressional Joint Inquiry into 9/11. And as director of the CIA in 2004, Gauss took actions to ensure that no one in the intelligence community was held responsible for 9/11. Those are just some of the legitimate suspects that I've named. If there are lawyers out there who want to make a difference for 9/11 truth and help solve the crimes of 9/11, they could pursue legal actions against these suspects for a number of reasons, whether it be lying to Congress, or insider trading, or dereliction of duty. But like any other opportunity to make a difference for 9/11 truth, it will require sticking our necks out and taking some risks. In summary, the 9/11 Commission was right that it was a failure of imagination that led us to the 9/11 crimes. But it's more than that. It's also willful ignorance in many cases, and a lack of focus. But we can do better next time, and as many of us have realized over the last 18 months, the next time is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That's another 19. It's an excellent book. I advise everyone to read it. And Kevin has done some remarkable things, and we appreciate Kevin. Appreciate your courage and your principle. Thank you.
Thank you, David.